My son Mark always said I was living in the past. He'd look around my study at the shelves of old books and the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco that will cling to the walls until this house is dust. And he'd shake his head with that particular brand of loving pity a child reserves for a parent they believe has lost a step. His eyes would always land on the rig, my Kenwood transceiver, the nest of coaxial cables, the hulking linear amplifier that hums like a sleeping bear. To him it was a monument to obsolescence, a dusty old ham radio setup from a world before the internet. He never understood. He saw a relic. I saw a lifeline. And in the end it was my salvation. You see, the thing about relics is they have a power that the modern world forgets, a quiet, steady power. And when you're 77 years old and a wolf has been invited into your home, you need all the quiet power you can get. This is the story of how my past saved my future, and how a voice crackling through the ether from 1,000 miles away became the hammer of justice that the world right outside my door couldn't hear. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own home, then lean in close. This one's for you. It started as these things often do, with a fall. It was nothing, really. I was reaching for a can of tomatoes on the top shelf, lost my balance for a second, and ended up on the linoleum with a bruised hip and a more severely bruised ego. I was fine, a bit sore, a bit embarrassed, but fine. But I made the mistake of mentioning it to Mark during our weekly Sunday call. The silence on his end was heavier than a winter coat. I could hear the gears turning in his head, the ones labeled duty and problem and aging father. 2 weeks later, Brenda arrived. Mark had hired her himself, vetting her through some high-gloss agency that promised compassionate, professional, and trustworthy senior care. He'd flown in from Seattle for all of a day and a half to get her settled, his face a mask of strained filial piety. He walked me through her credentials, her glowing references, her CPR certification. He said, "Dad, this is Brenda. She's just here to help out. Make sure you're eating right, help with the heavy lifting, keep the place tidy. It'll give me peace of mind." I looked at Brenda. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a tidy, sensible haircut and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. And she smiled a lot. It was a practiced, professional smile, one that radiated competence and warmth. She said all the right things. She admired my late wife's garden, complimented the sturdy oak furniture my father had built, and spoke in a voice that was soft and reassuring. She was, in every observable way, a perfect sheep. I didn't see the teeth hiding behind that smile until it was too late. The first week was a honeymoon. The house was spotless. The meals were regular and balanced, if a little bland for my taste. She was a ghost, moving through the rooms with quiet efficiency. I had to admit it was nice not having to worry about the vacuuming or hauling the trash cans to the curb. I told myself Mark was right. I told myself this was a good thing. I was just being a stubborn old coot, resistant to change. The change began subtly. It was a slow tightening of the net, so gradual I barely noticed the strands at first. My friend Frank, who I've had coffee with every Tuesday morning for 30 years, called. Brenda answered. She told me later, "Oh, Frank called while you were napping, Russell. I told him you were feeling a bit under the weather and needed your rest. He said he'd try again next week." I wasn't napping, and I felt fine. But what was I to do? Accuse this pleasant, helpful woman of lying over something so small? I let it go. Then it was the mail. It used to be my small ritual, walking to the box at the end of the drive, sorting through the bills and the junk mail. One day I went to the door and the mail was already on the hall table, neatly stacked. "I brought it in for you, Russell," Brenda said, beaming. "No need for you to be walking out there, in the damp." The damp? It was a perfectly sunny October day. But again I said nothing. It felt churlish to complain about someone being helpful. The real tipping point, the one that pricked the bubble of my denial, was the banking. I've always handled my own finances. I'm not some doddering fool. I was an electrical engineer for 40 years. I can balance a checkbook. But one afternoon, I was paying my utility bill online, and my hand was shaking a little. Arthritis, it comes and goes. Brenda was standing behind me, a cup of tea in her hand. "Here, let me help you with that, dear," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "Your hands look a little shaky today. You don't want to accidentally add an extra zero." She put her hand on the mouse. It felt proprietary, dominating. But I was tired, and my wrist did hurt. I let her. That was the door she needed. From then on, she was always there to help. She'd sit with me while I paid my bills, memorizing my passwords with a hawk-like focus I mistook for diligence. She suggested we link my checking account to a payment app on her phone, just for groceries and incidentals. "It'll be so much easier, Russell," she'd said. "You won't have to bother with cash or cards. I'll just keep a running tally, and we can settle up at the end of the week." It sounded so reasonable, so modern, Mark would approve. So I agreed. A month passed. I was sitting in my study one evening, looking over my online bank statement, a habit ingrained over decades. I was just scrolling, not looking for anything in particular, and then I saw it. A transaction at the local supermarket. I remembered the trip. We'd bought chicken, some vegetables, a carton of milk. The bill was maybe $35, but the withdrawal from my account was for $85. Underneath the amount were two small words: cashback, $50. I stared at the screen. My heart didn't pound. It just went cold and heavy in my chest. A lump of ice. $50. It wasn't the amount. I've lost more than that on a bad poker hand. It was the discrepancy. The lie. I had received no cash. I had not approved any cash back. I scrolled back through the weeks. There it was again, a pharmacy trip, a withdrawal for $72. The copay was $22, cash back, $50. And again, at the gas station, where she filled up her own car, cash back, $40. And again, small amounts, always 50 or less, always buried in a legitimate transaction. It was death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, methodical bleeding of my account, so skillfully done that an automated bank alert would never flag it. It was designed to look like the forgetfulness of an old man. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. The house suddenly felt different. The air was thick with betrayal. The pleasant, helpful woman humming in the kitchen wasn't my caregiver. She was a thief. She was a parasite who had latched onto me, and my own son had been the one to deliver her to my door. I looked over at the Kenwood transceiver, its digital display. Dark, a dusty relic. She probably couldn't even imagine what it was for. And in that moment, staring at the cold, hard numbers on the screen and the inert, powerful machine across the room, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or despair. It was the first faint spark of rage, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was only the beginning. The days following that discovery were the longest of my life. The house, my sanctuary for over 50 years, the place where my wife Eleanor and I had raised our son, where every scuff on the floorboard held a memory, transformed into a gilded cage. Brenda's constant cloying presence became a physical weight. Her soft, reassuring voice was like sandpaper on my nerves. Every time she said, "Are you comfortable, Russell? Or can I get you anything, dear?" I had to clench my fists in my pockets to keep from screaming. She thought my silence was frailty, my withdrawn nature a sign of my decline. In reality, it was the only way I could keep the fury from boiling over. I was an actor now, playing the part she had written for me, the confused, feeble old man, slowly fading into irrelevance. It was the most difficult role of my life. My isolation became absolute. My friend Bill, a fellow engineer from the old plant, stopped by one afternoon, unannounced. I saw his car pull into the driveway from my bedroom window. I started for the door, my heart lifting for the first time in weeks, but Brenda intercepted me in the hallway. "You just stay put, Russell," she said, that saccharine smile plastered on her face. "You look a bit flushed. Let me see who it is." I stood there helpless as I heard her open the front door. Her voice was a low, concerned murmur. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew their shape. I could imagine the performance, the worried frown, the talk of my bad days, the gentle but firm suggestion that a visit right now might be too much for me. A few minutes later, I heard Bill's car door shut and the engine start. He drove away without me even getting to wave. I retreated to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, my home no longer my own, and felt a profound and terrifying loneliness wash over me. She wasn't just stealing my money, she was stealing my life, piece by piece. That night, I couldn't sleep. The anger and the helplessness were a toxic cocktail churning in my gut. My thoughts kept circling back to Mark. How could he have done this? How could he have been so blind? I found myself drifting back in time to the phone calls that had sealed my fate. I remembered the call right after my fall, his voice thick with a panicky concern that was more about his own inconvenience than my well-being. "Dad, I'm worried sick. I can't just drop everything in Seattle and fly out every time you take a tumble. We have to do something." I'd tried to reason with him. "Mark, it was nothing. I tripped. People trip. It doesn't mean I need a keeper." "It's not a keeper, Dad," he'd said, his tone already laced with the weary patience of a parent dealing with a stubborn child. "It's just support. Someone to be there. I found this amazing agency. Woman I spoke to, a director, she was so understanding. They have a caregiver, Brenda Johnson, who has a file thick with commendations. She specializes in clients who are highly independent. Highly independent. The phrase was a piece of corporate jargon, designed to soothe my pride, a sugar coating on the pill of my diminishing autonomy. Even then, a part of me knew this was wrong. I tried to push back, to tell him I didn't want a stranger in my house, that I was managing just fine. "Dad, just try it," he'd pleaded, his voice shifting from patient to exasperated. "For me, just for a few months. If it doesn't work out, we'll figure something else out. But you're not leaving me any choice here. You're being stubborn. Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." And there it was, the emotional blackmail, however unintentional. "Don't make this harder for me." I had caved. I'd done it because he was my son, my only family since Eleanor passed. I was terrified of pushing him away, of becoming a burden he resented. In my effort to keep the peace, I had surrendered my own. It wasn't about revenge then, it was about survival, about holding on to the fraying thread of my relationship with my son. That passivity, that desire to please, had been my undoing. I had let the fox into the henhouse, because I was afraid of upsetting the farmer. Shaking off the memory, I knew I couldn't just call Mark and tell him. Brenda had spent weeks laying the groundwork. She'd undoubtedly been feeding him stories of my confusion, my memory lapses. If I accused her, it would be my word against that of a trusted professional. She would deny everything, weep a few crocodile tears, and I would be the one who looked paranoid and ungrateful. She had insulated herself perfectly. I had to be smarter than her. I had to be more patient. The next day, my new life began. I started my own quiet investigation. I'd feign a deep nap in my armchair after lunch, my breathing slow and steady, but I'd be listening to her every move. I heard her on the phone with her own friends, her voice no longer soft and caring, but sharp and crass. I heard her complaining about me, calling me the old man. I heard her making plans for a weekend trip, and I knew with a sickening certainty that it would be funded by my checking account. The best time was when she went out for her long grocery trips. The moment her car was out of the driveway, I'd spring into action. I'd go to my desk, my hands no longer shaking, and log into my bank account. I became a forensic accountant of my own life. I built a spreadsheet on my old tablet, a secret ledger. Date, vendor, amount charged, amount of cash back. I cross-referenced it with the receipts she'd leave on the counter. the ones she thought I never bothered to look at. The discrepancies were all there, a neat column of theft. By the end of the second week of my secret audit, the total had climbed past $2,000. Seeing it all laid out like that, in black and white, changed something in me. The despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just happening to me. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign of fraud, and I was going to stop it. But how? I felt utterly trapped. I couldn't use the phone. She monitored all the calls. I couldn't email Mark. She'd probably find a way to see that too. I couldn't trust anyone in my immediate circle, because she had so effectively cut me off from them. That night, after she had retired to her room at the back of the house, I walked into my study. The moon cast a pale light across the room, illuminating the hulking shape of my ham radio station, the Kenwood TS-890S, the ACOM 2000A amplifier, the Pulstar tuner. To Brenda it was a collection of dusty boxes with knobs. To Mark, a symbol of my refusal to join the 21st century. But to me it was a gateway. It was a connection to a world she couldn't touch, a network she didn't know existed. I sat down in my old chair, the worn leather sighing under my weight. For months I'd barely touched it. Brenda had complained about the strange noises, the crackling static that gave her a headache. So like a fool, I'd let it go silent. Not anymore. I flicked the power switch on the transceiver. The digital display glowed to life. A splash of amber in the dark room. I put on my headphones, cutting out the sound of the house, of my prison. I turned the main dial, and the airwaves came alive in my ears. A symphony of static, the ghostly whistle of Morse code, the distorted chatter of distant conversations. It was the sound of freedom. I tuned the rig to 14.275 megahertz, the frequency for the old goat's net, a group of us who had been checking in with each other every night at 0200 Zulu for the better part of 40 years. I listened for a moment, my heart pounding. Kilo 4 Alpha Charlie Papa, Art down here in Florida, calling the net. Anything new and exciting out there tonight? Art, retired police captain, sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. My hand went to the microphone, my fingers wrapping around the cool plastic. I took a deep breath and pressed the transmit button. Kilo 8 Romeo Sierra Tango, I said, my voice a little rough from disuse. Got a copy on you, Art. Russell here in Ohio. The reply was immediate, Art's familiar baritone crackling back with warmth and surprise. Key 8 RST. Good to hear your signal, old man. It's been a while. We were about to send out a search party. Everything all right up there? I looked around the dark study, at the evidence of the cage that had been built around me. Everything was not all right. But for the first time in a long, long time, I knew it was going to be. Everything's fine, Art, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. Just had some local interference I needed to work through. But I think I've got a clear signal now. In fact, I've got a situation here. I need to talk to the group. I'm going to need some advice on a pest control problem. In the language of our net, pest control was code. It meant one of us was in trouble and needed the full undivided attention of the group. A wave of static filled my headphones, and then another voice cut through. It was Sully, up in Montana. W7 SVN copies. Go ahead, Russell. The old goats are listening. And so, in the dead of night, with a thief sleeping soundly just down the hall, I began to tell my story. Not as a victim, but as a man preparing for war. It wasn't about revenge back then. Not yet. It was about taking back my home. But as I laid out the details of Brenda's quiet cruelty, her systematic campaign of theft and isolation, I could feel the cold resolve inside me hardening into something else, something sharper. It wasn't about revenge until it was. The study became my command center. Every night, after Brenda was asleep, I would slip into my chair, put on my headphones, and the world would open up. My radio net wasn't just a group of hobbyists. It was a council of old friends, a brain trust forged over half a century of shared airwaves. There was Art, Key 4 ACP, the retired police captain in Tampa, whose mind was a steel trap for legal procedure and human weakness. There was Sully, W7 SVN, a crusty ex-Army logistics sergeant living off-grid in Montana, a man who could orchestrate a three-pronged attack as easily as he could brew a pot of coffee. And there was Georgia, Key 4 Genu, a retired air nurse from Atlanta, whose understanding of the health care and elder care systems was encyclopedic, and whose empathy was as powerful as any medicine. We had developed our own shorthand over the years, a mix of standard cue codes and personalized jargon that would sound like nonsense to an outsider. It was perfect for my situation. Brenda became the local interference, or the bad propagation. The money she was stealing was current leakage or a power drain. My isolation was a poor signal report. K8RST to the net, I'd begin each night. Reporting continued power drain. Another 50 units leaked today through the grocery circuit. The interference is also blocking all incoming local signals. Over. The response from my friends was a balm to my frayed soul. There was no pity, only focus. Art's voice would cut through the static, sharp and analytical. Russell, this is Art. The pattern is key. Small, regular amounts. She's a professional parasite, not an opportunist. She's done this before. This isn't her first rodeo. We need to document every single instance. No detail is too small. Did she buy premium brand name coffee for herself with your money? Write it down. Did she use your laundry detergent for her own clothes? Write it down. We need to paint a picture of pervasive parasitic behavior. Sully, the strategist, was more practical. Art's right, Russ. You're building a case file, but a file is no good without a smoking gun. We need to bait the trap. We need to give her an opportunity she can't resist. Something that can't be explained away as a mistake or your own confusion. We need to create an incident that is clear, provable, and undeniable. Georgia would chime in, her calm voice a counterpoint to their tactical planning. And while you're doing all this, you have to take care of yourself, Russell. This kind of stress, it's a killer. Your blood pressure, your sleep. You have to keep your head in the game. You must continue to play the part of the harmless old man. Let her get comfortable. Let her get arrogant. Overconfidence is the mother of all screw-ups. We'll be here every night. You're not alone in this. Not for 1 second. Their voices, crackling across hundreds or thousands of miles of darkness, were more real to me than the woman sleeping 30 feet away. They were my rock. Bolstered by their support, I became a meticulous spy in my own home. I expanded my secret ledger. I started taking pictures of the receipts with my tablet and saving them to a hidden, password-protected folder. I documented every lie, every instance of manipulation. Frank, my coffee friend, I noted the date and time Brenda had turned him away. The mail, I noted when she started bringing it in, effectively seizing control of my correspondence. We spent the better part of 2 weeks planning the trap. Sully was the architect of the operation. "Okay, Russell," he'd said one night, his voice a low growl. "Here's what we're going to do. We need something that's both monetary and personal. The monetary part needs to be traceable. The personal part needs to be emotionally significant to you, but not intrinsically valuable. Something a petty thief would pocket without a second thought." The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. We settled on 2 elements. First, the money. I would go to the bank and withdraw $200 in brand new consecutive $20 bills. I would then use my tablet to photograph the serial numbers of each bill, creating a digital record. I would place this cash in my wallet and leave the wallet accidentally on my dresser, in plain sight. Second, the personal item. I rummaged through my old keepsake box. I didn't want to risk anything of Eleanor's. That would have been too much. Instead, I found it at the bottom. My father's old Zippo lighter. It was brass, dented from years of being in his pocket. It hadn't worked in decades, but I remembered the feel of it in his hand, the distinctive click it made when he opened it. It had no real monetary value. You could probably find one like it in any flea market for $5. But to a thief, a vintage Zippo looks like a score. It was the perfect bait. To set the stage, I started playing my part with more conviction. I'd forget things more often. I'd ask Brenda what day it was. I'd sigh and complain about how complicated everything was getting, how I couldn't keep track of things anymore. I was feeding her ego, reinforcing her narrative that I was a doddering old fool who wouldn't notice a thing. I also laid a piece of verbal bait. One morning, over breakfast, I mentioned casually, "You know, my son Mark is sending me a little cash for a project I was thinking about. Said he's putting a few hundred in the mail for me." I watched her eyes. There was a flicker, a brief, sharp glint of avarice that was gone as quickly as it appeared. She just nodded and said, "Oh, that's nice of him, dear." But I knew she had heard. The money in my wallet would now seem to her like a portion of this off-the-books cash from my son, untraceable, unaccountable, a freebie. The night before we were to spring the trap, I checked in with the net. My hands were clammy. "K8RST checking in," I said, my voice tight. "The bait is ready. Plan is a go for tomorrow morning. I'm not gonna lie, fellas. I'm nervous." Art's voice came back, solid as granite. "Stay the course, Russell. All you have to do is play your part. The rest is on us. I've already prepared the brief. I know the head of the Elder Fraud Unit for the state of Ohio. Used to work with him on a federal task force 20 years ago. The anonymous tip I'm going to make won't be going to some general hotline. It's going directly to the top. They'll take it seriously. I'm going to give them your address, the name of the caregiver, and a detailed summary of the suspected activity, including the pattern of small cashback thefts. I'll emphasize the isolation from friends and the interception of mail. Those are major red flags. I'll tell them the tip is coming from a source with a background in financial crimes, who has reason to believe there is an immediate and ongoing risk. They won't just send a social worker for a friendly chat, Russell. They'll be ready for bear. Sully added his piece, and when she takes the bait, Russ, and she will, don't react. Just note it. Let her think she got away with it. Let her have her little victory. The bigger the pride, the harder the fall. We're with you, buddy. Old 7 SVN clear. COV 4 GNU clear. Stay safe, Russell. COV 4 ACP clear. I turned off the rig and sat in the silence, the voices of my friends still echoing in my headphones. For months, Brenda had been running her silent takeover, isolating me and draining my resources. Now it was my turn. The board was set. The pieces were in position. Tomorrow, the silent takeover would be mine. The morning air was thick with a tense theatrical calm. I went about my routine with a deliberate manufactured frailty. I made a show of being unsteady on my feet as I walked to the kitchen for breakfast. Brenda watched me with that infuriating mix of pity and contempt. I was her project, her golden goose, and she was basking in the glow of her own cleverness. After breakfast, the curtain went up on the final act. I went to my bedroom to get dressed, leaving the door slightly ajar. I took my wallet, fat with the crisp, consecutively numbered 20s, and placed it on the corner of the dresser. Then I took out my father's old Zippo and set it right beside the wallet. It gleamed under the light from the window. A perfect little temptation. I came out of the bedroom and remembered something in the kitchen. I asked Brenda if she could go into my room and fetch the gray cardigan from the chair. "My old bones are feeling a chill this morning," I said, my voice quavering slightly. It was a perfect excuse to send her into the room, alone, with the bait laid out. She gave me that patient smile. "Of course, Russell. You sit right down." She was gone for less than a minute. When she returned, she was holding the sweater, her expression placid, unreadable. "Here you are, dear," she said, helping me put it on. There was no sign that anything was amiss. She was a consummate professional. I waited an hour that stretched into an eternity. I pretended to read the newspaper, but the words were just black marks on a page. My heart was a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. Finally, I made my move. "Oh, bother," I said, slapping my pockets in feigned panic. "My wallet. I can't seem to find my wallet. I must have left it in my room." I hobbled back to the bedroom, with Brenda following close behind, the picture of concern. "Now, don't you worry, Russell. We'll find it. You're always misplacing things." Of course, the wallet was no longer on the dresser. We searched for a few minutes, Brenda clucking her tongue and sighing with theatrical sympathy. Finally, she discovered it. It had fallen between the dresser and the wall. A classic maneuver. She handed it to me with a triumphant smile. "See, I told you it would turn up." I took the wallet, my hands trembling for real this time. I opened it. At a glance, the cash was still there. But I knew. I could feel it was lighter. I didn't count it in front of her. I just sighed with relief and tucked it into my pocket. "Oh, thank you, Brenda. My mind is like a sieve these days." I also made a mental note. The Zippo was gone. Not fallen, gone. As soon as she was busy in the laundry room, I took refuge in the bathroom, locked the door, and counted the cash. $200 had become 160. Two of the new, crisp 20s were missing. She had taken $40. Her signature move. Not too much, not too little. A plausible amount for an old man to misplace or misremember spending. The fox had taken the bait. The trap was sprung. I spent the rest of the day in my armchair, the very picture of placid senility. Inside I was a coiled spring. I was waiting for the storm. That night, my check-in with the net was brief and to the point. K8RST to the net. The package has been delivered. The interference has acquired the target. I repeat, the target has been acquired. The forecast is calling for a major weather event tomorrow. Over. Art's voice was grim and satisfied. Roger that, K8RST. The barometer is falling. The authorities have been notified and are anticipating the storm front. Expect arrival sometime after 1000 hours, local time. Hold fast. K4, ACP clear. The next morning arrived, gray and overcast, a perfect match for the mood in the house. Brenda was humming as she made pancakes, blissfully unaware that she was a fly caught in a web of her own making. She was cheerful, almost giddy. Successful theft had made her bold. At exactly 10:15, the doorbell rang. Brenda wiped her hands on her apron, a flicker of annoyance on her face. It was probably one of my nosy old friends, ignoring her warnings to stay away. "I'll get it," she said, her voice clipped. I stayed in my armchair, my heart thudding against my roof. I heard the front door open. I heard Brenda's initial welcoming tone, the one she reserved for strangers she intended to charm. And then I heard that tone curdle. There was a long silence, followed by the low, firm voice of another woman, and then a man's voice, equally firm. Brenda appeared in the doorway of the living room. Her face was pale. The professional smile was gone, replaced by a tight, brittle mask of confusion and fear. The sheep's clothing was beginning to fray at the edges. "Russell," she said, her voice a strained whisper, "there are some people here, from the county. They want to talk to you." Behind her, a woman in a practical blazer and a man in a polo shirt with a county logo stepped into view. They were not smiling. The woman held up an ID. "Mr. Russell Miller?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "My name is Sarah Davis, and this is my colleague, Tom Price. We're with Adult Protective Services. We've received a report of some concerns, and we'd like to speak with you for a few minutes. Alone." Brenda's composure finally snapped. She stepped forward. her hands fluttering. Alone? Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. He gets very confused, agitated. I'm his caregiver. It's best if I'm here to help him understand. Miss Davis's eyes, clear and sharp, did not leave mine. That won't be necessary, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. It is standard procedure that we speak with our client privately. Ma'am, we'd appreciate it if you would wait in the kitchen. It was the first time I had seen anyone challenge Brenda's authority in my home. The first time someone had looked past her facade and spoken directly to me, as if I were a competent adult. For Brenda, it was a seismic shock. The power in the room had just shifted, and it had shifted away from her. I watched as the color drained from her face, and for the first time since she had walked into my life, I saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. The storm had arrived. Miss Davis and Mr. Price closed the living room doors, and for the first time in months I was alone with someone other than my captor. The quiet in the room was a physical relief. Miss Davis sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture open and non-threatening. Mr. Price stood discreetly by the door. Mr. Miller, she began, her voice gentle but direct. We received an anonymous but very detailed tip expressing concern about your welfare, specifically regarding financial exploitation and isolation. Can you tell us in your own words what's been going on here? This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of planning, of silent suffering. I didn't play the victim. I didn't rage or weep. I followed the script Sully and Art had helped me prepare. I was calm, lucid, and factual. I was the retired engineer, the man of data and logic, who had stumbled upon a problem and documented it meticulously. I leaned forward and picked up the tablet from the end table. It's all here, I said, my voice steady. I opened the hidden file and handed it to her. I created a ledger. It started when I noticed discrepancies between my grocery receipts and my bank statements. Small amounts of cash back, $50 here, $40 there, that I never received. Miss Davis took the tablet. Her eyes scanned the spreadsheet, her expression growing more grim with every line she read. She scrolled through the photos of the receipts, the highlighted bank statements. This is very thorough, Mr. Miller. I'm an engineer, I said simply. I believe in data. I then told them everything. The friends turned away at the door. The mail being intercepted. The constant narrative that I was confused and forgetful. I explained how my son, with the best of intentions, had hired her, and how she had systematically used that trust to create a fortress around me, cutting me off from my support system. Finally, I got to the trap. This morning, I said, my voice dropping slightly, I believe she stole from me again. I had $200 in my wallet. Now there is 106. Two $20 bills are missing. I also had my father's old Zippo lighter on my dresser, a sentimental item. It's gone. Miss Davis looked at Mr. Price, a silent communication passing between them. He nodded and discreetly spoke into a small radio on his shoulder. And the bills, Mr. Miller? Miss Davis asked, her focus entirely on me now. Is there anything special about them? A small smile touched my lips. As a matter of fact, there is. They were new, from the bank. I took the liberty of photographing their serial numbers. I swiped to the next file on the tablet. The crisp, clear image of the two missing $20 bills filled the screen. Miss Davis's eyebrows shot up. She looked at me with a new level of respect. Mr. Miller, she said, you have built a very strong case. Just then, the living room doors opened. A uniformed police officer stepped inside. My heart leaped. It was happening. It was real. The officer, Miss Davis, and Mr. Price walked into the kitchen, where Brenda was pacing, wringing her hands. I could hear their low, professional voice. I heard Brenda's voice rise in pitch, becoming shrill and defensive. This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything. He's a confused old man. He loses things all the time. You can't just... Her voice was cut off by the officer's calm, authoritative tone. Ma'am, we have credible evidence of theft. I'm asking for your consent to search your purse and your vehicle. No, absolutely not. You have no right, she shrieked. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice flat and patient, "I can get a warrant in about 20 minutes. Refusing a search now is only going to make things worse for you." A heavy silence fell. Then, a defeated sigh. They brought her purse into the living room and emptied its contents onto the coffee table. And there, among the lipstick and tissues and crumpled receipts, was my father's brass Zippo lighter. It sat on the polished wood like a confession. Brenda gasped. "I was just holding that for him. He asked me to put it somewhere safe." The officer ignored her and picked up her wallet. He opened it. Inside, nestled among her own worn bills, were two brand new crisp $20 bills. He held them up. Miss Davis pulled up the image on my tablet. The officer read the serial numbers aloud. They were a perfect match. The game was over. Brenda's desperate countermoves began. She started to cry, fat, theatrical tears. "He set me up. The cruel old man. He set me up. He's vindictive. He hated me from the beginning." She lunged for the phone on the hall table. "I'm calling his son. Mark will tell you. He'll tell you how confused his father is." She managed to dial Mark's number, her hands shaking with rage. She screeched into the phone, "Mark, it's Brenda. Your father has gone crazy. He's called the police. He's accusing me of stealing. You have to do something." Miss Davis calmly took the phone from Brenda's hand. "Mr. Miller? My name is Sarah Davis with Ohio Adult Protective Services." She proceeded to explain the situation to my son, her voice a steady, factual counterpoint to Brenda's hysteria. She told him about my ledger, the photographic evidence, and the stolen property recovered from Miss Johnson's purse. I watched as the last pillar of Brenda's defense crumbled into dust. The line on Mark's end was silent for a long time. The well-meaning, naive son, the one whose peace of mind I had prioritized over my own safety, was finally being forced to confront the consequences of his dismissive neglect. He had not been the villain of this story, but his willful blindness had unlocked the door and invited the villain in. His silence was the sound of his world being irrevocably rearranged. The final scene was almost anticlimactic in its grim efficiency. The officer read Brenda her rights as he clicked the handcuffs around her wrists. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet house. Her face, stripped of all its masks, was a grotesque mess of fury and disbelief. As they led her past me, her eyes met mine. The manufactured warmth was gone, replaced by a venomous hatred that was chillingly pure. "You'll be sorry, you old fool," she hissed, her voice low and ragged. "You'll be all alone now. No one will take care of you. You'll rot in this dusty old house." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, at this woman who had tried to erase me from my own life, and I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just a vast quiet emptiness where the dread used to be. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. They led her out the front door and into the waiting police car. I watched through the window until it turned the corner and disappeared. The house was silent, utterly, beautifully silent. It was my house again. I walked slowly into my study, my sanctuary, my command center. I sat down in my chair and reached out, my hand resting on the cool metal of the Kenwood transceiver. I flicked on the power switch. The display lit up and the gentle hum of the electronics filled the room. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. I didn't get on the air. I didn't need to. For now, it was enough to just sit there, in my own chair, in my own home, and listen to the sound of my freedom. The silent takeover was complete. The aftermath was a whirlwind of activity, but it was a cleansing one. Mark arrived the next day, his face a haggard portrait of shame and exhaustion. He had flown in on the first red-eye from Seattle. He stood in my living room, the same room where he had so confidently introduced me to Brenda, and he looked lost. "Dad," he started, his voice cracking. "I don't know what to say. I am so sorry. I didn't want an apology as much as I wanted understanding. I didn't yell. I didn't say I told you so, as tempting as it was. I just sat him down and told him the truth, calmly and without embellishment. I told him how his well-meaning concern had felt like a dismissal of my competence. I told him how my attempts to voice my own feelings had been brushed aside as stubbornness. I was never a problem for you to manage, Mark, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm your father. All I wanted was for you to listen to me, not just handle me. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 20 years. The carefully constructed walls between us, built of politeness and unspoken resentments, came crumbling down. It was painful, and it was necessary. Our relationship didn't magically become perfect, but it became real. He stopped seeing me as a fragile liability and started seeing me as a person again. That in itself was a victory. The legal process against Brenda moved forward with surprising speed. My meticulous ledger, the photographic evidence of the serial numbers, Art had been right. It was an open and shut case. The police, prompted by my evidence, looked into her work history. It turned out I wasn't her first victim. They found 2 other families in neighboring states who had reported similar, unsubstantiated suspicions. Their claims had been dismissed because they lacked the kind of hard proof I had provided. My case became the linchpin that brought her entire predatory career to light. She faced multiple felony charges, and her name became poison in the caregiver community. She wouldn't be harming anyone else. That night, after Mark had gone to his hotel, I went into my study. The air felt clean. I sat down at my station, put on my headphones and tuned the rig to the old goat's net frequency. I waited for the familiar call. At precisely 0200 Zulu, Art's voice boomed through the static. K4ACP calling the net. Any stations out there tonight? I took a breath and keyed the mic. Kilo 8 Romeo Sierra Tango checking in. There was a half-second of silence, and then the airwaves erupted. Russell, by God, it's good to hear you. It was Sully, his gruff voice full of relief. We were waiting. How's the weather up there in Ohio, old friend? The weather has cleared, Sully, I said, a smile spreading across my face. The storm passed right over. Not a cloud left in the sky. The local interference is gone. Completely gone. That is outstanding news, Art cut in, his voice warm with satisfaction. A good forecast for once. We read you loud and clear down here in Florida, Russell. 5-9. Full signal strength. We didn't talk about the details. We didn't need to. There was no gloating, no talk of revenge. There was just the quiet, profound satisfaction of a shared victory. We talked for an hour, about antennas and propagation, about our families, about nothing and everything. It was the easy, comfortable talk of men who had built a friendship on a foundation of trust and loyalty, transmitted through the ether. They hadn't just given me a plan, they had given me back my strength, reminding me that I was not the frail, forgetful man Brenda wanted me to be. I was K8RST. I was a part of a network. I was not alone. When I finally signed off, my voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was gratitude, but it was more than that. It was the feeling of being home. Months have passed since that day. My life has settled into a new, better rhythm. Frank and I have our Tuesday coffees again. Bill stops by whenever he's in the neighborhood. The mail is once again my small, private ritual. Mark calls every other day, not out of a sense of anxious duty, but just to talk, to ask about my day, to tell me about his. He listens now. I sit here sometimes in my study, the faint hum of the transceiver, a comforting presence. I look at this equipment, this collection of knobs and wires that my son once called a relic. Brenda saw it that way too. She saw a dusty, useless thing taking up space. She couldn't imagine it had a purpose, a power. And in a way, she was right. It's not about the technology. This could have been a network of gardeners sharing seeds, or old soldiers meeting at the VFW hall. The radio wasn't the weapon. The loyalty was, the friendship was. The network of trust, built over decades, was the one thing her modern, cynical brand of evil couldn't comprehend or corrupt. People look at a man my age, they see the gray hair and the walker I sometimes use, and they make a judgment. They stop seeing the engineer, the husband, the father, the friend. They see a category, a problem to be solved, a box to be checked. They see a relic. They forget that relics have history. They have strength. They have seen storms come and go. It was never really about the money. The few $1,000s she stole was an insult, but it wasn't the wound. The wound was the disrespect. The wound was the attempt to steal my dignity, to render me invisible in my own life. It was never about revenge until it had to be about justice. She didn't just steal from me, she underestimated me. And that was her fatal mistake. She saw a sheep old and tired. She never thought to check for teeth. So that's my story. It's a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it crackles quietly in the dark, waiting for the right moment to be heard. If you've ever felt overlooked or had your voice silenced, tell me about it in the comments below. What's your ham radio? What's the hidden strength or the secret lifeline that people around you underestimate? I read every single one, and if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe to the channel. You never know when you might need a reminder that even when you feel most alone, there's always a network out there, somewhere, waiting for your call.